This is not our dog. I swore to have pets forever after a story that happened to me last year. The studies were over and the summer was in full bloom outside, which turned out to be very hot at that time. I had to spend these summer holidays at my aunt's in a suburban village, which could not but rejoice. The aunt's plot was located near the forest and was very beautifully landscaped, with a wide variety of flowers and trees. Along the winding paths there were flower beds with roses, lilies and tulips, and in secluded corners there were benches, inviting you to enjoy the silence and singing of birds. In the center of the garden there was a small pond where frogs lazily splashed. Aunt Jena paid special attention to her garden, and this was evident in every detail. From the neatly trimmed lawn grass to the carefully selected flower arrangements. I was looking forward to the start of the holidays to get back to this piece of paradise. Among other things, I was also looking forward to meeting Sherry, a large Belgian shepherd dog with thick black fur. She was her aunt's favorite and had lived with her for many years. She loved me too, because I always played with her and took her for walks. Memories of Sherry were particularly vivid. I remembered how we explored every corner of the place together, how she happily jumped into the stream, and how we lay down on the grass together, looking at the clouds. These moments were filled with warmth and carefreeness, and I couldn't wait to relive them. As for my aunt, she was a very intelligent and sensible woman. By the age of 35, she had achieved the harmony with herself and the world that many only dream of, and also had everything she needed for a comfortable life. She achieved all her successes on her own without relying on someone else's help. Engaged in alternative medicine and esotericism, she has earned undeniable authority and recognition in this direction. I, in turn, remained skeptical about her studies, but I did not doubt their importance to her, because this was the essence of her existence. Finally, the long-awaited day has come. I enthusiastically packed my things and imagined my meeting with my aunt. When I arrived, the sun was already going down, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold. There was a light aroma of blossoming apple trees in the air, and I was impatiently walking along the familiar path to my aunt's house. But the meeting was not what I expected. Aunt Jena stood in the doorway, and instead of a radiant smile, her face was distorted by fatigue, her eyes dimmed, and her movements were slow and heavy. She tried to smile, but her smile was more sad than joyful. I felt my heart sink at the sight of her exhausted state. "Hello, dear," she said barely audibly, somehow reluctantly hugging me. "Aunt Jena, are you okay?" "It's okay. I'm just a little tired. Come in." Taking my aunt's word for it and trying not to show signs of my own upset, I entered the house, unaware of the next trouble waiting for me. My attention was immediately drawn to Sherry's strange behavior. A dog who always greeted me with excited barking and waving, now she was sitting in the corner and quietly looking at me. Her eyes were full of confusion and anxiety, and she didn't come up to me as usual. "What's wrong with Sherry?" I asked, squatting down and holding out my hand to her. "Are you good?" "Oh, please, don't worry. Our pet recently experienced a whole shock. She got lost in the forest and returned only a week later. Now she behaves a little strangely, but I think that she will recover very soon." Poor thing, what a nightmare. I put my hand on the dog's head, but the dog pulled its muzzle away in displeasure and, looking sideways, left. My aunt and I were left alone. "You're probably tired. You've been getting ready all day. Let's go. I'll take you to your room." I silently followed my aunt up the stairs. It was strange that she did not even invite me to drink tea, as she usually did, but not paying attention to this, and deciding that today was a separate occasion, I meekly wished her good night and began to settle down. My room was the same as I remembered it, cozy and welcoming, with the soft light of a table lamp and embroidered paintings on the walls. I opened my suitcase, neatly arranged my things in the drawers of the chest of drawers, and prepared my pajamas. Everything seemed so familiar, but at the same time, there was an unusual atmosphere in the house. Finally, turning off the light, I went to bed. The air in the room was cool, and I wrapped myself in a blanket. Sleep did not come for a long time. Perhaps the change of scenery had such an effect, and I needed to get used to it. After lying there for 30 minutes, I involuntarily began to listen to the night sounds of the house, and gradually my imagination began to draw more and more disturbing pictures in my mind. The creaks of the old house turned into the steps of intruders, and the wind outside the window seemed like a terrible howl. I tried to convince myself that it was just a game of my excited imagination, but the more I tried to distract myself, the more anxious I felt. Suddenly, I heard a distinct claw clatter on the floor. The sound was so clear and close that my heart sank. The knocking continued, getting closer, and soon stopped right at my door. I held my breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The silence became almost palpable, until there was a faint creak, and the door opened softly. Through the narrow gap between the door and the jamb, I saw Sherry. In the darkness of the room, her eyes sparkled with a cold light. They read ill will. She stood motionless, like a statue, and her gaze was directed directly at me. I lay there without moving, trying to figure out what had caused such a change in her behavior. But when I took a deep breath and tried to sit up, Sherry suddenly turned abruptly and ran away, disappearing into the darkness of the hallway. Her sudden disappearance only increased my anxiety. I got out of bed and went out into the hallway, but Sherry was no longer in sight. Only her quick steps, moving down the stairs, broke the silence of the night. What had happened made me feel uncomfortable, and I decided to go back, this time closing the door from the inside with a latch. I didn't want to think about what had happened. Going to the window that overlooked the garden and sitting down on the windowsill, I fixed my eyes on the street. The moon illuminated the paths and flowers, giving them a silvery hue, and in the distance I could hear the gentle murmur of a stream. The scenery was soothing, and I finally began to feel sleepy about an hour later. Not resisting this, I lay down on the bed and immediately sank into oblivion. I was woken up by Aunt Jena. She looked a little better than yesterday, but still I noticed that she woke up only recently, despite the fact that it was almost lunchtime. "Good morning. I'm sorry to wake you up. It's just this situation. I need to go away on business. I won't be here until tonight. Come on. I'll show you what's going on in the kitchen, so you don't starve to death here." I rubbed my eyes and, stretching lazily, nodded my head. "Okay, I'm on my way. I'll just change my clothes," I answered, getting out of bed. Aunt Jena waited for me in the hallway. We went down to the kitchen, where she began to show me where everything was and how to use the kitchen appliances. I noticed that her movements became more confident, and the same glint appeared in her eyes. "Here is tea, coffee, and here is sugar and various delicacies for breakfast. The refrigerator is full, so you won't go hungry," she said with a smile, opening the cabinets and drawers. "Thank you, ma'am," I said. "I'll definitely cook something. And one more thing," she added, If Sherry behaves strangely, don't pay attention. She is like that sometimes, especially when I am not at home. I nodded, although deep down I felt a little uneasy. Before leaving, I managed to watch the scene of my aunt talking to the dog and asking her to protect me and not to offend me. It was very nice, and my soul somehow immediately felt prettier. But after my aunt left and I was alone, the house began to seem completely different without her presence, and I felt anxiety growing inside me. Sherry didn't show up, and I had no idea where she could be. I decided to keep myself busy and began to prepare dinner, trying not to think about the night sounds and Sherry's strange behavior. But in the back of my mind, I suspected that I would remember this day for a long time. As it turned out, it was not in vain. Sitting at breakfast and watching some videos, I heard strange knocks coming from the corridor, as if someone was hitting the floor with something. Getting up from the table, I went to find out the source of this sound. Looking out of the opening, I flinched and recoiled from surprise. It was Sherry. Looking at me with an absolutely blank stare, she sat and waved her tail, which beat on the floor. It was these sounds that distracted me from breakfast. In her teeth she clutched a throwing plastic disc of red color. When Sherry saw me, she jumped up and ran out into the street as if to play. Without a second thought, I immediately followed her, because, despite the strange circumstances, I was glad that the dog came to life and showed me the attention that he had shown before. We started the game in the yard, but soon Sherry found that there was not enough space and she dragged me behind the gate into a clearing at the edge of the forest. I would toss her the disc, and she would happily bring it back, wagging her tail. So, probably, pro body for a couple of hours, but then Sherry suddenly ran away with the disc into the forest and never returned. I waited, but she never showed up. With anxiety in my heart, I went on a search that took a long time. Passing through the dense thickets, I called to the dog, but there was only silence in response. I continued to walk deeper into the forest until I was very far away. Suddenly I remembered that Sherry had never liked this game. I don't know how it got out of my head, but I realized it as I stood in the middle of the forest in the deepening twilight. The forest was quiet, and only occasionally the rustle of leaves was heard. "Sherry!" I shouted. As I was about to leave, I took one last look around, and at the last moment I saw her standing on her hind legs and peeking out from behind a tree. Her muzzle was distorted by a creepy, almost human smile that made me freeze in place. It was something I had never seen in dogs before. Sherry looked at me, and there was something like a sneer in her gaze, which you don't usually see in a dog. Succumbing to instinct, my legs seemed to carry me through the forest back to the clearing. When I finally ran out at her, I did not find a chase. From the wall of gloomy trees there was only silence and coolness. I heard Aunt Jena's voice. I saw her walking by the fence with a lantern and calling us. I walked towards her at a brisk pace, halfway through Cherry, who seemed to appear out of nowhere. She happily trotted to her mistress, wagging her tail and pressing her head to the ground. My aunt exclaimed joyfully when she saw us and, sitting down, began to stroke the dog and called me to her. I was so frightened, I thought where you had gone. We were playing a plate in the clearing. We were a little late. Oh, I'm so glad Sherry started playing again. Before you came, she was so sad. I smiled, not giving the impression that something was wrong. I wasn't going to tell my aunt about what had happened. I don't think she would have believed it, and if she had, she wouldn't have given it the attention she deserved. As usual, referring to the incident after which Sherry began to behave like this. We entered the house and went straight to the kitchen. Aunt Jena put the kettle on the boil and began to lay out the purchases on the table. I, sitting at the far edge of the table, sat silently. For some reason, because of the shock, it was difficult for me to start any conversation. Apparently, the aunt was not embarrassed by this. She herself did not mind spending the evening in silence. Only over tea did she tell me a rather boring story about her day at work. And then she said that she needed to go away for a couple of days and asked me to look after Sherry, give her food and take her out for a walk. And she also allowed me to call one of my friends if it would be better for me. This news made me happy because spending time with my aunt turned out to be not as fun as I thought. Besides, I didn't want to be alone with Sherry after today's devilry. I didn't believe in any mysticism, but the thought that what was now lying at my aunt's feet was no longer our favorite dog, but something that only tried to seem to her. Of course, it would be stupid to believe in such a thing, and there was probably a logical explanation for everything. But I didn't know how to check it yet. It was time to go to bed, and after saying goodbye to my aunt, I went to my room. As I was leaving the kitchen, I turned around and saw Sherry grinning after me from under the table. The blood in my veins immediately froze, and I almost ran to the room, slammed the door, and locked myself from the inside. Wasting no time, I dialed my best friend. "Hello, Mary," I began, trying to speak as calmly as possible. "I have a strange request for you. Can you come and live with me for a couple of days here at my aunt's house? To me, you just need company." On the other hand, I heard my friend's surprised voice. "Of course I will. Everything is fine." "Your voice sounds strange," she replied with concern in her voice. "Yes, everything is fine. It's just a little lonely here." "I'll be glad to see you," I lied, not wanting to go into details over the phone. We agreed that she would come the next day. Hanging up the phone, I leaned back on the pillows and tried to calm down. But the image of Sherry grinning at me did not leave my thoughts. What is happening to this house? What happened to Sherry? And most importantly, will I be able to unravel these mysteries before they harm me or Aunt Jen? The night passed quietly without strange sounds and unexpected incidents. In the morning, Aunt Jena, as promised, left early, leaving me alone with Sherry. I tried not to think about yesterday's incident, but anxiety still sat quietly in the corner of my mind. A couple of hours after the aunt's departure, as agreed, a friend arrived. I met her on the doorstep with a smile, trying to hide my anxiety. "Hello, Mary. How's the road?" I asked cheerfully, hugging my friend. "It's okay, a little traffic, but I'm glad I made it. How are you doing?" she answered, looking around. We entered the house, and I decided it was time to tell her what was happening, but I had to do it in a way that would not scare her. "You know, strange things have been happening here for the last couple of days. Aunt Jena doesn't behave as usual, and even Sherry." I hesitated, trying to find the words. "What's wrong with Sherry?" Mary asked with interest. "She has become something else. Last night, for example, I saw her smile at me, but it wasn't a cute dog expression. It was something." Mary looked at me in disbelief, but I could see that she was trying to understand and support. "Maybe you're just tired. Or is it because of stress?" she suggested. "Maybe," I agreed, "but I'm glad you're here. I will feel calmer." We decided that the best thing to do would be to spend the day together, do something, and not to think about oddities. But deep down, I knew that Mary had to know the truth if the situation suddenly worsened, and I hoped that together we would be able to solve this mystery. After Mary and I had breakfast, we were in a cheerful and working mood. We decided that today was a great day to do gardening. In the pantry, we found an old box full of seeds of various flowers that seemed to be waiting in the wings. "Look at how many things are here," I exclaimed, sorting through the packets of seeds. "Let's plant them today. Aunt Jena will be delighted when she comes back and sees the new flowers in the garden." Mary smiled and nodded. "That's a great idea. I always wanted to try my hand at gardening. What flowers do you want to plant?" We decided to start with daisies and lavender, as well as add some bright calendula to add variety to the color palette of the garden. With seeds and garden tools in our hands, we went outside and got to work. The air was filled with the aroma of fresh earth and flowers, and a light breeze played with the leaves of the trees. We worked together, joking and laughing, and soon forgot about everything in the world. This day promised to be beautiful. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed how the curtain in the window on the second floor moved. Looking up, I saw that Sherry was watching us. Her gaze was still and piercing, and it seemed to me that it was not just curiosity, but something deeper, almost human. "Mary, look," I said quietly, without taking my eyes off the window. Mary turned and saw it too. "Does she always look like that?" she asked with a note of concern in her voice. "No, it started quite recently," I replied, feeling my anxiety growing inside me. "I don't know what that means, but it's abnormally." We both looked at Sherry one more time before she slowly stepped away from the window, and the curtain fell back into place. We continued to work, but now with a new sense of caution, constantly looking back at the house. After we finished with the flowers and gathered our tools, Mary and I decided it was time to have a snack and discuss Sherry's strange behavior. We settled into the kitchen with cups of fragrant tea and fresh sandwiches, and I opened my laptop to search the internet for possible reasons for this behavior of dogs. "Look, they write here that there can be many reasons for strange behavior, ranging from health problems to psychological features." I pointed to the screen. "Perhaps Sherry is in pain or stressed, and this is her way of letting us know." Mary nodded, carefully reading the information on the screen. "It is also said that if a dog suddenly starts to behave aggressively, it can be caused by fear or pain. Maybe we should take Sherry to the veterinarian," she suggested. I agreed to her proposal. It seemed that this was the most reasonable step. After discussion, we decided that it would be best to call a veterinarian at home. This will allow us to find out what the reason for the pet's strange behavior may be without exposing it to additional stress from the trip to the clinic. "I'll find the phone number of the local veterinary clinic," I said, picking up the phone. "I'll call you now and find out when they can come." Mary nodded and looked at Sherry, who was lying at the door, watching us with a heavy gaze. "I hope the veterinarian can help," she said. "Sherry really doesn't act like she normally does." I dialed the number and waited for an answer. The veterinarian agreed to come this afternoon. We breathed a sigh of relief, hoping that we would find a way to help Sherry. All this time, the dog continued to watch us, and after I hung up the phone, he jumped abruptly and ran out into the street, leaving us perplexed. Mary and I looked at each other, not understanding what could have excited her so much. "We've got to look after her," Mary said, already heading for the door. We went outside, but Sherry was already out of sight. Looking at each other, we realized that we needed to start searching. "Mary, she must be here somewhere," I said. trying to stay calm. We have to find her before the veterinarian arrives. We split up to explore the area around the house. I walked toward the garden where we had worked in the morning, and Mary went to the woods where Sherry liked to wander. "Sherry," I called, passing by flower beds and trees. "Sherry, where are you?" But no answer, no hello. With every minute my anxiety increased. After a while, I returned to the house to check if Sherry had returned, and met a friend who also found no trace. With a heavy heart, we decided to call the veterinarian and cancel the visit, but as soon as I took out the phone, I heard the sound of a car outside the gate. The veterinarian was already driving up. We went out to meet him and explained the situation. The veterinarian, a middle-aged man with a kind face, only shrugged his shoulders. "Bring her to the clinic when you find her," he said, handing me a business card. "We'll help her." He got into the car and drove away, leaving us at a loss. We slowly entered the house and immediately saw Sherry. She sat on the floor in the hallway and slowly wagged her tail. Her eyes were mocking, as if she was mocking us. "Sherry, where have you been?" I exclaimed, but the dog only continued to wag his tail without taking his eyes off. Mary and I looked at each other. What was happening frightened both of us. A friend pulled me by the elbow up and on the way reminded me that when we searched for information on the internet, she came across articles and videos in which people said that their animals behave strangely and unnaturally. By opening a laptop of the criminal code, she proposed to study this topic in more detail. Sitting at the monitor, Mary found information about skinwalkers, mythical creatures from Native American mythology that can take the form of animals using their skins. According to legends, skinwalkers are sorcerers or witches who have broken the taboos of their communities and gained supernatural powers. They can be cruel, they love to terrify and kill, and you can distinguish them from ordinary animals by their unusual, human behavior. "Look," Mary said, pointing to the screen. "It says that skinwalkers can walk on their hind legs and have human features." Maybe she didn't finish the sentence, but I understood her hint. We kept reading, and the more we learned, the more real it seemed that Sherry could be one of them. The articles and videos we found were full of stories of strange encounters with such creatures, and they were all similar to what happened to us. "We have to be very careful," I said, closing my laptop. "If Sherry is really a skinwalker, we need to know how to behave and how to defend ourselves." We decided to spend the rest of the day in the house, trying not to be alone and keeping the doors closed. The uncertainty of what Sherry could do kept us on our toes, and we both knew that our lives were in danger. It was dark outside, and we could not find information on how to deal with these creatures. It seemed to us that there would be a simple, well-known solution, like an aspen stake for vampires. But no, all that was known was that as long as these creatures were in animal form, they could not be harmed at all. Users also advised never to attack them, omitting the details of the consequences of such a trick. Mary wanted to go to the toilet, and willy-nilly we had to go out into the corridor. We walked slowly along it, clinging to each other, and suddenly in front of us, 2 meters away, Sherry ran from one room to another, on her hind legs, her eyes flashing. We froze. "She's just trying to scare us. Don't give in, let's go," her friend said and quickened her pace. The toilet was behind the room that Sherry ran into. We successfully passed it and the two of us went to the bathroom, since none of us wanted to stay in the corridor. I turned away while Mary was doing her business, and suddenly someone began to scratch their claws at the door and whine pitifully. At that moment, I must have turned pale with fear. My friend behaved well, and her fighting spirit helped me too. "What do you want from us? Stop it!" Mary shouted confidently, and threw the door wide open. The dog jumped away and stared at us with the most ordinary, innocent look. Backing away, we reached our room and locked ourselves there. "Thank you. I don't know what I would do without you," I confessed to my friend. She only hugged me encouragingly and nodded. Sitting on the bed, we quietly dozed off, despite the light on, and soon fell asleep altogether. I woke up to heart-rending screams coming from below. Apparently, Mary was screaming. Without hesitation, I rushed to help. As strange as it was, her scream came from the dark basement, the door to which had always been closed until that moment. Turning on the flashlight on my phone, I began to go downstairs, trying to step as confidently as possible. The scream rang out again, sweeping me with a wave of icy terror. Now it was difficult to guess the notes of Mary's voice in it, but without immediately paying attention to it, I continued on my way. Leaving the stairs behind, I illuminated a small room with the beam of a flashlight. My friend was nowhere to be found. While I was trying to understand what was happening here, a black shadow flashed past me and rushed up. Then, there was a slam of the door. I ran back and found the door closed. There was no chance to get out, and no one came to the cries for help. I had to spend the whole night in a cold, damp basement. Thank God, Aunt Jena returned in the morning. She heard me and let me go. Her expression radiated anxiety and incomprehension. Going to the kitchen, I explained everything to her in detail and told her. I don't know if she believed it or not. After all, Sherry no longer showed signs of strangeness, and began to behave as usual. She recognized me and, as before, approached, burying her nose in her knee. After what I had experienced, I could not reciprocate her feelings, and just went home, with no thought of ever returning. Mary went missing, and more than once I had to tell the police a made-up story about how in the morning I simply did not detect her presence, and thought that she had gone home, and only then found out that this was not the case. Be that as it may, I considered only myself, and no one else to blame for her disappearance. If I hadn't called her then, everything could have been fine, or maybe I would have disappeared instead of her. Life gradually returned to normal, my studies began, and I completely immersed myself in it. But something happened today that reminded me of that ill-fated trip to my aunt's. I was sitting in the classroom and solving a test, when suddenly I noticed a huge raven sitting on a tree that grows right in front of the window. Everything would have been fine, but his gaze was fixed directly on me, and in his expression you could clearly see anger and mockery.